Let's talk about multi-cloud computing. I'm going to give you the insider's perspective on this. So a lot of times if you go to a public cloud providers conference, so you go to a technology conference, you go to other things where they're selling a particular flavor of cloud, it's difficult to get an understanding as to what's really going on out there. And so what we're seeing is, as the previous speaker mentioned, not only a movement to multi-cloud, but a movement excuse me, to cloud complexity that we haven't seen before. We're moving into very complex architectures. They're going to take more time and effort to make right, and it's going to take a while for us to learn how to get this stuff right. And there's some lessons that I learned from the last 5 years or so, and I'll go ahead and share them with you now. So, some of the benefits of the multi-cloud movement includes, more productive options for the enterprises. What we're doing is we're trying to get down to a brokering infrastructure where we're providing the best of breed services. So whether you're dealing with Amazon, Microsoft, Google, whatever cloud provider you're looking to use, whether you have private cloud, public cloud, existing legacy infrastructures, the ability for you to leverage what you need when you need it and at the price point that you need it really is the ultimate goal here. And what we're finding that when people have adopted a single cloud provider, such as Amazon Web Services typically, they're always going to follow on with a Microsoft or Microsoft Azure, follow on with a Google, and then follow on with specialized clouds, and probably 3 or 4 dozen software as a service providers in there, as well as platform as a service providers in there. So it becomes kind of a jumbly mix of stuff. When you look at the motivation of why they're doing it, it's because ultimately they're trying to match their needs of the business to the technology as closely as they can, and you can't blame them for that. So in some instances, if you go with a single cloud provider, which a lot of enterprises have a tendency of doing, it's going to be a force fit each and every time because of what the cloud provider doesn't do. And that seems to be the case for moving to multi-cloud. So the single pane of glass stuff is here. We're at a conference that's promoting technology that's able to abstract you from having to deal with the details behind the native systems, and that seems to be the problem to solve right now. If I look at the market in terms of where the growth's going to be, certainly in the public cloud providers we're going to see growth, but those are typically going to be manned by multi-billion-dollar companies with $1 trillion valuation, which everybody can't be. But the problem that we're looking to solve is the governance, monitoring, and management piece, which if we don't get right, we won't allow ourselves to scale, we won't allow ourselves to provide the security that we need, we won't allow ourselves to be excellent with the particular kind of technology we're looking to build. So cloud brokers, multi-cloud management tools, minimize time to solution, they lower costs, and they really enable you to do a multi-cloud solution. If it wasn't for governance tools out there, and there's a list a mile long, if it wasn't for management and monitoring tools out there's a list a mile long, we're not going to have a chance of managing these environments. So whether you like it or not, we're heading to a multi-cloud world. That's going to add complexity. We have to abstract ourselves from the complexity in order to make this stuff work, and that seems to be the problem that we're looking to solve. So ultimately, the goal is to create agile solutions that are able to put volatility into a single domain. We're able to put the cloud services, we're able to put the processes, the orchestration technology, the monitoring and management technology, the governance technology into a single point of configuration, which will allow us to make changes that we need to make without affecting everything and anything within the infrastructure. So we've been at this since the service-oriented architecture days, enterprise architecture is a discipline, object-based development, distributed objects, things like that. And this is another chance to go in there and work at something at the component and resource level, at the API level, and actually get it right, so we're able to take advantage of this stuff and make an agile environment. We're seeing success in the marketplace right now. Banking customers specifically, since they spend a lot of money on this, are reaping the rewards from moving in this direction. So things are getting complex. Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, Amazon Web Services, and we have VMware in there, and there's dozens of other OpenStack-based private cloud distros. And it used to be more complex, 3 or 4 years ago when we had maybe 10 public cloud providers in the space. Now we're functionally down to about 5, including IBM and and some of the other players in the space. However, the complexity comes in the fact that we're mixing and matching internal-based systems with external-based public clouds. So we're moving to this thing which is a multi-cloud, which mixes and matches legacy systems, which are typically going to be non-cloud. There may be a few private clouds there, if any, but the majority of it's going to be plural public clouds, and our ability to kind of bring these things together to make sense of them, make them work in the environment. So this is the only graph I think I have that things are, as far as the growth of the market. And this is the right scale one. I like to use their reports because they actually have a very pragmatic methodology in kind of measuring things. And so in looking at the market, when they looked at companies with 1,000 plus employees, 89% are moving into a multi-cloud environment. And really kind of no one saw that coming. We saw, talked about this 4 years ago, and we looked at the complexity kind of creeping in the cloud. They would have said the objective of cloud computing is to make things less complex and simple. We can move everything into a public cloud provider, and by doing that, we're going to be able to leverage the best of breed public cloud provider. They're going to do all the services for us. Now here we are in 2017, and this really kind of started back in 2013. We're seeing this stuff move from the idea of simplicity into the idea of complexity, but the ability to kind of manage complexity through these different management layers and governance layers and things like we discussed, and we'll see more of that later in the presentation. So keep in mind that this is really kind of a natural progression of what we're doing. We're not necessarily chasing shiny objects here. This is about enterprise IT. The poor guys that have to make their business run, have to run on the cheapest platforms, have to do things in terms of making sure security is going to be maintained, performance and governance, and everything that goes along with operating a platform, that made this decision consciously because of the architectural requirements that were popping from the business. So the business really drove this. This wasn't driven rank and file people within the organization that play the managed by magazine game and they chase the shiny objects. This was driven by a real particular guttural need within the organization to actually take advantage of cloud in this particular way. The trade-off, as I said, is complexity, but the benefit is flexibility, agility, and the ability to come best price and also the best of breed solution. So most organizations are still attempting to optimize their cloud strategy. And I see this every day. So, here we are, maybe, I'd say we're probably 10 years into the hype cycle with cloud computing. I got into it back in 1999, but it really started to appear and became relevant in 2006, and then everything else is history. We kind of emerged into it. But here we are 10 years later, and most organizations either have no strategy, they're ad hoc, they're opportunistic. Some have a repeatable stuff, and some have a managed strategy, and some have optimized. And I guarantee you the 3% that are saying they have an optimized cloud strategy are lying. Because everybody out there is all over the board in terms of how they're going to deploy their existing cloud-based infrastructure. And it's very difficult to figure out how these things are really going to come together. So 68% of organizations use some form of cloud today, and it's a 61% increase. 69% of organizations, do not have a mature cloud strategy in place. So we've gone into the multi-cloud stuff based on this. So what happened was, we don't have a cloud strategy in place, we're going to go ahead and pick the technology tactically to solve our particular problem. Now there's good reasons to do that. However, that leads to us not having necessarily the planning and architecture stuff we need to make sure that the end state target that we're looking for and all the enabling technology and all the cloud resources we're going to leverage are going to be optimized for our particular solution and going to basically work for our particular business. So this is kind of how we got this way. Everybody's operating an ad hoc. You have lots of fiefdoms within organizations that may not talk to IT in terms of their providing cloud. IT is trying to get things under control. And in essence, we're moving from a very chaotic approach to architecture, very complex approach to architecture, and trying to simplify it and put the management methodologies in place, put DevOps in place, security in place, governance in place, things like that. So that's the problem we're looking to solve. So things are accelerating in the fact that we have respectful, deliberate, skeptical, and traditional. The traditional people who, what I would call maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the folded arm gang, they used to invite me into their company and basically yell at me for an hour in terms of they don't want to move to cloud and they don't know the reason to do it, are moving into cloud right now. So a lot of those conversations I had 3 or 4 years ago where organizations completely discounted cloud as a legitimate solution because of security concerns, things like that. And there were some legitimate reasons in there, by the way. Compliance issues have kind of crossed the chasm and they moved into cloud. Now it's kind of the other way around, where I always look for some healthy skepticism when I deal with IT. Now it's everything will be solved in the cloud and that's when the miracle will occur. And we seem to be putting too much emphasis on what cloud is, what its capabilities are, when at the end of the day, it's really kind of a different way of consuming technology. It's getting better. It's a lot better than some of the on-premise systems that we have out there, but it's not a cure-all in moving everything into cloud. And so as we're doing migrations, we're going to find a couple of things. Number one, 30% of the data sets or the workloads that we're seeing within the typical enterprises, and it could be between 5,000 and 10,000 workloads in a typical Global 2000 enterprise, are not cost effective to move to the cloud. And therefore they either have to be left on premise, they have to be refactored significantly, which means rewriting sometimes from scratch, sometimes significant portions of the application. Some of them can be lifted and shifted, some of them can be retired. All these things that are occurring in the space as we kind of move into cloud, because the reality is ultimately we can't leave our existing infrastructure behind. So again, it becomes a very kind of a complex problem in the fact that we can't take 100% of our workloads, move them into the cloud, that ISAM COBOL application you've had running for years, it's running your inventory systems. You're not going to find a platform analog for that thing in the cloud, so you're going to have to figure out another way to do it. And of course there's colos and MSPs, things like that you can use. So this is a actual readout that we gave to a client. It's a little off in places, but that goes from 2014, 15, and 16. And this is the number of FTEs that they'd have to onboard to move into the cloud. The investment they have to make, and it goes from $100 million to a little north of maybe $250 million, and then the value that it brings. And this is typically what you're going to see. So it's not this big 45-degree curve of value that we see as we move in the cloud. As we move in the cloud, cloud becomes expensive in terms of onboarding different resources, onboarding different people. And the more we have in terms of multi-cloud, the more complex the environment, the more FTEs you're going to need to augment because you have people around to maintain the particular cloud, the more investment you need to make it happen. The value is always going to be there, else you shouldn't do it. And we have to go through these kind of checks and actually guide them through that each and every time when we deploy these things. This is a Global 2000 company here that's had a lot of their information redacted. But ultimately, the value is going to be smaller than I think that most people think. The real value of moving into cloud, which is difficult to measure and people's eyes glaze over when I say it, is the agility word, the ability to kind of onboard systems, the ability to kind of scale systems up, the ability to kind of change systems, the ability to put complexity into a domain, do all the things we just talked about, which provides organizations that are going to find agility much more valuable commodity, such as banks, high tech, healthcare, things like that. The value is going to be ultimately in the agility, and that is going to look like a 45-degree angle if you can figure out a way that everybody can accept to value it. And so you have an operational value, and the reality is I won't do anything with a Global 2000 company if I can't prove operational value when I model their systems, at least in this kind of instantiation of technology, the state of technology today. But the real value that they're going to find is the agility aspect of it, and going forward we need to focus on that. So understanding the business case, this is a Joe Weinman, friend of mine, wrote Cloudynamics, dedicated optimal, break-even zone, price per use optimal. Basically the ability to kind of put metrics on what cloud value will bring to the organization. And it behooves you to kind of look at this stuff in terms of what metrics and what financial models and what business models are going to be right for your organization, because they're always going to be different. I mean, one of the most common questions I get at conferences is people asking me, how do I know that cloud is going to produce value? What value can I assign to a particular cloud? And there's really no core metrics you can use. You have to look at each problem domain, understand the problems you're looking to solve, and what kind of metrics you can apply. So we have the cloud maturity model, and this is the way we kind of rank organizations in terms of standardized, lower cost, consistency of use of technology, combine, normalize assets, virtualize, lower cost, delayed provisioning. And these are all preparing for cloud. So in other words, organizations that are modernizing their existing infrastructure to move into cloud, moving into virtualization, moving into different management layers, dealing with different security stuff, moving to identity-based security, that's all well and good. They're prepping for cloud. They're basically preparing their infrastructure to cloud. Moving up from that, automation, lower cost, self-provisioning, automated governance, and they start moving in some applications into those realms. And then there's cloud innovators, which have the orchestration aspect of it, dynamically aligned to business, self-adapting, automated governance and security, and enhanced business opportunities that are going to be there. So the reality is, and don't feel bad about this, if you're looking at yourself either at standardized or even lower than standardized, the majority of enterprises are there. I mean, if you read the tech press, we think we're having a big cloud party out there, and everybody's moved most of their applications to the cloud. Most enterprises, including software as a service systems, have moved less than 10% of their applications to the cloud, and they've done so kind of willy-nilly without the optimization that we talked about. All these different things that really need to occur in starting to move in this direction. And so, the answer is, or the question is, how long is the journey going to take? And I think the reality is, we're still 10 years away from significant amounts of applications and workloads that exist in the cloud, building the management infrastructure, building things we need to build. The public cloud providers and the private cloud providers and the cloud technology providers may wince a bit when I say it, but if you look at the progress we've made in the last 5 years and you kind of grow that out in terms of our ability to kind of migrate applications over time, the amount of time it takes is typically going to be longer than we think. It's going to be a long trog over time, but it took us a while to get to distributed systems, a while to get to PCs, a while to get to all these different, move into the web, things like that. And I think cloud computing is really kind of the ultimate paradigm shift. And it's going to take us a long time to actually get in those positions. So, types of cloud governance and resource management. There's 3 that I've identified. Cloud service API governance, the ability to basically monitor and manage APIs. Cloud management platforms or brokers, the ability to manage resources, such as allocate cloud resources, such as allocate services such as storage and compute services and things like that, and manage them. And then provider native governance and management, which basically comes along with the cloud, which is typically going to be your best and worst options. Your best option if you're going to have a single cloud provider, but if we just made the case that 89% of the people out there won't have a single cloud provider, and therefore that's going to be your worst option. Under those, we have a couple of different things. Runtime automated, which means that we do everything actively. It's an intelligent system, and therefore it's going to add value. Or we have design time, which is completely worthless. It's doing nothing behind the scenes other than providing yourself with a tool. We have active automated and cloud management platforms. In other words, it's able to do everything for you. And automatic, and basically hide you behind a single pane of glass, and automates basically most of the provisioning and deprovisioning, management costs, governance, things like that, links to the security. And then we have passive, which should never be the option for you, even though those tools are out there. They're just dumb repositories that you have to update, typically through a tool. They're not actively dealing with the services that they'll. And then provider native governance and management, we have active and passive again, same sort of rule. Typically at passive, you don't find out there anymore. It was a large part of the systems maybe 4 years ago. Now everything's active. So you can use the management platform, the management capabilities of the native cloud service provider. The problem is Amazon's not going to give you the ability to support Microsoft and Google and private clouds and legacy systems and things like that. They're just going to support their particular brand of cloud, where cloud management brokers and platforms are basically going to be the best bang for the buck. They're going to remove you from having to deal with the resources, and so you can abstract yourself away from dealing with the resources, and then API management around dealing with the particular services, dealing with the APIs. So cloud governance becomes the center of it all. There's a article I'm publishing this week in InfoWorld where I read a blog for, talking about, kind of the ability or the missing policies that people have within the organization. And governance, by the way, is not just technology. People look at it as API level governance, resource level governance, things like that. It's technology, it's people, and it's processes. And as you can see, certain things surround those particular items. The ability, methodology, KPI monitoring, certification, organizational stuff, competency, rules, technology, portfolios, tools, things like that. And all of this basically comes into line with a governance strategy, which may end up being, as many as 10 different tools that are integrated together to solve your particular problem. Different repositories, different ways of managing APIs, managing resources, different automation, different links with security, different identity-based management, different resource-based management, device-based management if you're dealing with IoT stuff. All this stuff is relevant and needs to kind of fold into your particular strategy. And I don't think these should be islands into themselves. So in the enterprises that you work at or you may consult with or you may sell products to, that it's not a good thing if we're typically dealing with different governance solutions that are independent within the enterprise with the same grouping of applications and the same use of cloud. And I understand the reason for doing that, and budgetary issues, turf issues, things like that. This thing really should be the center of the universe in terms of how we're dealing with governance, so we can have shared policies, shared security restrictions, shared identity-based management systems, shared directory systems, versus replicating them, and also worse, replicating them with different kinds of technology that don't talk to one another. So, just what is a CMP? I'm not going to read that, but it's basically an integrated set of stuff that sits above public clouds, private clouds, internal data center stuff, and it could be anything and everything. So the idea is don't get into the game of managing everything yourself. You certainly can, but there's going to be a tipping point. Typically that's about maybe, I'd say 500 workloads and 10,000 services, where you can't manually manage that. It's just too complex. You can't do this stuff with an Excel spreadsheet, even though I have clients who do it all the time. And you have to create this automated set of systems, cloud management platform, performance management platforms, all these things that are different brands doing different things, which takes you away from having to deal with the systems that are there. And that's a very hard thing for people to accept, because you are actually moving control away from having to deal with the native clouds and giving it to an abstraction layer that isn't yours, you didn't build. However, if you don't deal with automation, you don't deal with governance, you don't deal with the notion of abstraction, you don't deal with the simplicity, single pane of glass, this stuff isn't going to scale. It's not going to work for you. So, CMPs, cloud management platforms, monitoring and management tools enable enterprises to manage many clouds as one. And again, no particular brand. You're going to have several kinds of brands out there, different kinds of governance tools, different kinds of things to do it, but they boil down to the kind of common patterns. They have configuration, they have automation, they have governance, they have global, the ability to manage clouds globally, and the ability to manage multiple services or instances of services. So it's not unusual for these things to manage, say, 100,000 different cloud services, maybe 2,000 workloads that exist in the cloud, private clouds, public clouds, and on legacy systems. And then as a user of these systems, I'm just dealing with a single configuration layer, single automation layer, versus a self-service portal, operations and admins, API integration. And so I'm driving this thing through a dashboard. So even though this thing may be hugely complex on the back end, I'm still looking at the same dashes and gauges each and every time, whether I'm dealing with any flavor of private cloud, some of the OpenStack distros, VMware, database services, and then the different cloud, public cloud flavors, including Amazon, Microsoft, Google, those sorts of folks. So this is going to be your optimal solution. Obviously, this is going to take some time and some work to get there, and I think it'd be lying to you if you said that everything works well right out of the box. It's going to take some effort and some knowledge and some trial and error to get this right for your particular problem domain. But if you're trying to move into a multi-cloud solution, you don't have that, or you're trying to avoid that, you're just going to run into failure. It's going to hit a tipping point. You're going to unable to manage it. You can't monitor it. You can't react to it. You can't deal with alerts. You can't deal with ops issues. You can't deal with dev issues. All these sorts of things will come up and bite you in the butt. So if we're moving to the cloud native applications, we're thinking differently about how we deal with applications. So applications are now scale out, distributed, stateless, infrastructure agnostic, elastic scalability, all these sorts of things. So as we move into the cloud, whether a multi-cloud, single cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, whatever you're looking at, we need to think differently about how those applications are deployed and how they live in the cloud. So the idea, if you're going to take this cruddy, poorly designed application and put it in the cloud, private or public, it's just going to be a cruddy or poorly designed application in a cloud. And it's going to behave exactly the same way. May behave a little better because you're not going to run into limits of scalability. So you're going to have to reconsider, how we deal with all these different things and how things can be augmented inside the application and outside the application. So we're able to take this to the next level before we move to the targets. Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, whatever religion you have within your organization, IBM Cloud. So keep this in mind that if we're moving to cloud, we're typically going to have to move into cloud native capabilities, and those cloud native capabilities should be, in essence, really kind of part of what we do. So this is a Gartner chart. I'm mandated by law to put these in my presentation. So yours is mine. This is a cloud management platform reference architecture that Gartner puts out. So as we start moving forward, we're going to see different kinds of systems that are part of it. And I kind of like this one. And this has been I think they did this back in 2013. But they have access management, self-service interfaces, identity management, service catalog, service provision, service optimization, the ability to have service governance, service orchestration, and then resource management down at the native levels, resource configuration, resource monitoring, resource pools, virtual and physical resources that are built. So if you're going to look for this kind of technology, this is kind of a good reference architecture to take a look at. Use mine as well. But ultimately, the capabilities are, it's going to manage all the cloud native capabilities that we typically would manage through a CLI or through APIs, using a layer where we have automation. We're able to abstract ourselves from the existing systems, and we're able to push ourselves in a way that allows us to basically remove ourselves from the complexity. So, single consolidated control point for governance, orchestration, delivery. So kind of drilling down on this a bit, we're dealing with things such as regulatory compliance processes, SLA processing, including auto-scaling, configuration management policies. And if you notice the word policy within this kind of governance, which is resource-based governance or API-based governance, is really going to be systemic to everything we do. We're trying to put this stuff into a configuration layer. So in other words, we're dealing with the configuration of a policy which is going to dictate certain guardrails or certain things that we put around a particular resource. So there's a storage resource, an API resource, interface resource, a database resource, whatever it is. And there's thousands of different kinds of resources that exist in public, private, and legacy environment, public and private clouds and legacy environments. SLA is the ability to kind of make sure we live up to what the contractual arrangement is with our public cloud, security zone policies, lifecycle event policies, orchestration policies, access control and settlement policies, workload placement policies, and the ability to have quotas and scheduling. So if this looks kind of like a big bummer, it really isn't, because what we're doing is putting guardrails around certain things that we're limiting use of in the cloud by whom, what, where, how. And specifically, if you're in a DevOps environment where lots of people are accessing resources at the same time, lots of different automation where you have scaling and we have staging and we have deployment and we have continuous integration, all these things that comes along for the ride, you got to have these kind of capabilities in place. You're going to get in trouble very soon. And they're automated unto themselves. So once you set them, you forget them. You may have to change them if something's out of whack, and you can do that manually or even do so through an automated technology. But the idea is to take backup and failover policies, resource capacity policies, storage tier policies, anything you need, and put it into automation. And so we're automating stuff that we can do over and over again, and that's going to provide us a consistency, which is going to provide us with the ability to kind of deploy this stuff as frequently as we need it, and using the technology approach that we need. And this is probably the most important thing. So app config, code artifacts, platforms, topologies, configuration, services, application components, security, environment config, all these things really kind of come into play. And the cloud management platform is providing the governance, links to security, make this stuff happen. Typically a suite of stuff. You're going to have monitoring management, you're going to have resource governance, API governance, all these things. What they're adhering to your particular policy or the way that you're approaching this particular problem. And again, minus this, you don't have a chance of scaling beyond much where we are today, because you're going to run into a wall in terms of the complexity you're dealing with. It's going to be unmanageable and untenable for people who are leveraging it. Your DevOps is going to suffer, your SecOps is going to suffer, your CloudOps is going to suffer, and it's going to fall over pretty quickly. I've seen this a bunch of times. In fact, there's any theme of my career over the last 3 years is flying all over the world, fixing these particular problems with this kind of solution. So take that to heart. So again, cloud management platform provides automation and governance across application development life cycles. So this not only exists within an ops domain, which it certainly exists because we're operating the system using this governance system and policies in place to make sure we don't run out of bounds, but it exists in a DevOps environment as well. So when we're building clouds and we're building multi-cloud solutions, typically DevOps is going to be at the heart of that, because that's how we're moving and deploying applications out into particular platforms that we're running, either public clouds, private clouds, legacy environments. And the ability to kind of link these things and provide automation and governance across all these various dev processes, supporting DevOps is absolutely a critical success factor in making DevOps work if you're going to deploy to a cloud environment or deploy to any kind of complex environment. Well, we would love to see DevOps where at the end of the DevOps workflow, there's a single platform, a single database, a single language, all these things. That's science fiction. We have different generations of platforms, different generations of legacy that are there, different kinds of cloud platforms, different kind of cloud native environments, different kinds of databases, different kind of database models. And unless we have the ability to kind of configure ourselves around having the developers deal with that complexity, that's also not going to scale. So multi-cloud, especially multi-cloud with DevOps, is going to absolutely be an imperative that you leverage this kind of technology. If you don't, you're going to run into a problem. It seems to be a common theme. So how do you make the right calls? Well, number one, you have to look at compatibility, suitability. Number two, benefits, and then the recommended endpoints. You have to look at COTS versus custom, application lifecycles, elasticity, commodity versus core, physical architecture, workload, logical architecture. That's a bunch of stuff we're just throwing in there as kind of the buzzwords that you have to deal with, as we're moving into the various systems. And what you need to do is go through a system triage where you're looking at all these various applications and you're putting them into buckets. It's either going to be replace, it's going to be rehost, it's going to be refactor, it's going to be major refactor, minor refactor, retire, all these sorts of things to figure out that as we're making decisions about what to do with particular applications and what to do with particular functions, that we're localizing those particular things in the platforms where they should be at. And we're not moving them off into platforms where they're not going to work. And by the way, if you think that means not everything should go to the cloud, that's absolutely what I'm saying. In fact, you'll find that on an average, 30% of application workloads, as I mentioned earlier, are not going to be cost effective to move to the cloud. You're going to leave them where they are, therefore you're going to have to manage them where they are, move them into a MSP, managed service provider, move them into a co-location provider, or something that's an analog of your existing legacy systems, because Amazon can't take them, Google can't take them, OpenStack private cloud can't take them, Microsoft can't take them. So the hosting endpoints need to make the right calls, need to figure suitability, need to figure the benefits that we're looking for, and then the endpoints. And the endpoints in my world is just the technology that we're going to move them into. So making the right calls, think big, start small. Typically the client is going to be a conceive, crawl, walk, run. So conceive, we do the business case. We do the budget, we do the roadmap. Crawl, we do the initial cloud endpoint step. We need to define pretty much what we're looking at in terms of where we're going to go, but we're not making the decision as to make the move to go there yet. We need to look at app portfolio assessments, pilot migrations to make sure that we're not smoking something in terms of the compatibility of the languages and the data on the target systems. We need to walk, figure patterns and tools, application modernization approaches. Second tranche of migration, we've done an experiment. We've gotten 10 running and working. We've learned from those. Now we've done another 100, process tuning, and then bring in DevOps, run discovery and migration and testing automation, initial app migration and modernization, setting up application migration factories, initial refactoring patterns, DevOps provisioning, automation libraries, and then Fly is basically moving this out to multiple business units, moving it from a single domain within an enterprise, say development or IT or inventory control or manufacturing, and replicating it out into the other business units. Dealing with the app migration, center of excellence, common platform services, refactoring automation, operational automation, those sorts of things. And the impact is going to increase as you move forward. Now, the timeline there could be as short as a year within a very small business, but typically in a Global 2000 company, I think that's going to be a 10-year period of time. So adjust accordingly. But the problem is, of course, in Global 2000 companies, at least in this country, we typically don't like to think that far ahead. So we like to think in little tranches of things. So I urge people to kind of figure this out into phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5, create key metrics, create key value points, and make sure you track against those value points as you start rolling this stuff out. Because at the end of the day, it's a business problem, not a technology problem.